Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Recovery Science Eco Series. This is a training brought to you by the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring, CSTAT, in collaboration with the Peer Recovery Innovation Network, PRIN. My name is Andrea, and I will be helping to facilitate this conversation today. Before we start, I want to remind you that this session is being recorded, and you may find it later at our Be Well Texas YouTube page. Please continue adding your names, email addresses, and organizations on the chat. This information will help us to confirm your attendance to this class. If you need captionings, please go back or go down to your Zoom menu and click on the captioning feature. As always, the Echo sessions are an open space for all of you, so we want to hear your perspectives, your ideas. Please make sure that you take part in this conversation. If you want to do so, just raise your hands so we know that you're taking part on the session and on the class in general. So today we have Dr. Robert Ashford presenting on artificial intelligence and recovery science. And we're very excited to talk about that topic today. And after that, we're opening the space for all of you to ask your questions to Dr. Ashford. And then during the second part of the session, we're going to be giving some updates on the program on itself. So we'll start with some introductions from the Recovery Science Hub and from some special guests that we have today. Let's start with Patrick. How are you today? Welcome to Recovery Science.
I'm doing good, Andrea. Thank you so much. Patrick Hibbard, Assistant Research Scientist at Chestnut Health Systems. I am a researcher, a formerly incarcerated scholar with in long-term recovery from substance use disorder, and love recovery science and love peer support services. So just super grateful to be here.
Thank you, Patrick. Cheryl, how are you today?
I'm good, Andrea. Thank you. I'm Cheryl Pacapelli. I am a person in long-term recovery from alcohol and other drugs since 1989, and I am a hub member. Very happy to participate in this and very much looking forward to Dr. Ashford's presentation on AI. Thank you.
Thank you. And our program coordinator, Kirsten.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten. I'm the project coordinator for PRIN, and I'm also really excited for today's presentation.
Thank you. Our program director, Dr. Adrienne Lindsay.
Hey everyone, Adrienne Lindsay. I direct the Center for Substance Use Training and Telementoring at Be Well Texas, UT Health San Antonio, and just continuing the hype building for Dr. Ashford's talk on AI. I think we're all excited. Well, thanks for being here, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. And a very special guest from Be Well Texas, our Director of Communications, Andrea Rocha.
Hi, everyone. I couldn't do a better intro than that. Thank you for having me. Excited for the talk today.
Wonderful. And then, of course, Dr. Ashford, welcome to the session again. And please, whenever you're ready, take it away.
Sure. Thank you for the intro and warm welcome. It's only fitting that I think the same way the RS Echo came into being a few years ago, it will go out the same way, which is me presenting way over time because I talk too much. But it is phenomenal to be back and being excited both about the topic, which is certainly kind of at this bleeding edge of digital tools for peers, and it's certainly we'll talk some about its intersection with science as well. Because with all emerging technologies and all innovations, right, we should be empirically studying these two and not just wishing on a hope and a whim. But also excited for what this is becoming as we evolve into the next iteration of it, which we'll certainly close out with. But for some of you, I know I've been giving this a variant of this talk for the last few weeks, actually, and some of you I think attended the last one, so it's good, especially the ones at Unity that are on the call. But we've made few changes, and really as we get into it, and I'll screen share in a moment, it's my ask to everyone, right? And this is, I think, similar if you've been in the field for a while, and doesn't matter if you're a scientist, studying addiction, substance use recovery, a peer worker, peer supervisor, advocate, or somebody else, a policymaker, government official, right? We used to have really contentious and healthy at times conversations around things like medications for opioid use disorder, MAT, and recovery and its place and what that looks like. And they were divisive for a long time, right? Though I think in large part, a lot of those conversations have been settled, even though there's certainly still some stigma. It took a while, and artificial intelligence, like many other things, is similar, right? People have strong feelings, as they rightly should, as they consider the ethics, the implications, both personally and professionally. What does it mean for jobs or quality of care, its energy and water use, right? Like, I'm not naive that this is a potentially contentious option, right, or conversation and topic. So my ask, and to all of you, is as we think about it today, regardless of where you're at on that spectrum of heck yeah, let's do this and let's have done it yesterday, or hey, let's slow down. I got a lot of concerns, or just a hell no. Like, that's okay too. Like, but let's approach it in the same way we do all conversations, including with topics that were otherwise contentious in our field, like medication use or harm reduction and recovery. Right? Is come in with an open mind, right? Put it, whatever those ideas are, let's put them to the side for this conversation, and let's have it and see if we can't broaden some of our perspectives, right? We may not change everybody's mind. That's not the goal. The goal is just knowledge of what this thing is, what it could be, and more importantly, what it could mean for recovery science, and more specifically, the peer support workforce, including organizations. So with that, I'm going to screen share, hopefully successfully, and also put myself on Do Not Disturb. One moment.
Okay, we see them. We see the slides.
Perfect. Thank you. And I realized I was on mute as I was asking if anybody could see them. So thanks for realizing that. You're a professional. So we are, regardless of your role, there's going to be takeaways for everybody that's on the call. Right? We know we have a diverse group that's always joined this echo. It is, at least from the presentation and content, two things are going to be true today. One, I'm going to pare down what is usually a longer presentation and do my best to stay on time. Second is it is designed largely from the perspective of peers, peer workers, peer supervisors, peer organizations. But it is, because of it's such a new and emerging topic, there will be healthy nuggets across that, right? So I think everybody can apply that in your own ways, regardless of the role that you may have, right? And more importantly is, thank you all for continuing to join these sessions, and more specifically this one, as we wind down this iteration of what the Echo looks like, right? And this session specifically is designed to introduce, artificial intelligence, which at this point everybody has probably heard of or used it, or been appalled by it. But AI, we also want to look at what is it, how do we define it empirically, right? What is actually true about it, regardless of what we may read in the popular media or from our friends. And then talk about how it can be used to support the incredible work that peer specialists, peer organizations, recovery professionals do every day, right? So we're going to cover what AI is, how it works, what it can do, and more importantly, can't do. And most importantly, how you might be actually to be able to begin using it in your work. If you are not a peer, some of those examples may be less applicable, but certainly happy to have some follow-up conversations after the fact. This one is more funny because you'll notice, and I'll be at the forefront with this, and we'll talk about it later, right? This entire presentation, including the slides, are supported and augmented through AI use. So that is what AI thinks I look like, which it's kind of handsome, so I can go with that, I guess. But many of you already know me, but if you don't, my name's Robert. Please call me Robert. I'm a person in recovery. What that means for me is a lot of different things over the last 16 years, but more importantly, today means I get to be a dad, get to be a researcher, get to really continue to engage in recovery science and peer work with our work as a recovery community organization at Unity, and partner with great colleagues such as yourselves, right? And I also have and have always had a huge passion for digital and virtual recovery support services. Have published and done a lot of study on these topics, right, over the last 10 years or so. And lots of things have changed, but we've always been particularly interested in this idea of what does augmentation, accessibility, and impact of digital, more recently virtual, and now artificially augmented recovery support services and the infrastructure look like. It's one of my most favorite topics. And generally, as I think about that, as we think of the peer field, which I care most about, the community-based workers, there's not a whole lot of innovation in terms of technology and the use of those supports. We don't get the wide sweeping funding like clinical and medical health systems did to adopt robust and sophisticated EHRs. We're not the leading field where people adopt and implement new technologies. That's largely on the clinical side, so we're underserved in that sense. So it is a huge mission of mine, but it's also making sure that we maintain our peerness, right? This idea of, even in recovery science, of community-based participatory actions. We need ethical perspectives, lived and living experience perspectives within that technology, not just people coming to give it to us. And we're going to skip some of these as I try to reclaim some time, right? But things to be thinking about as we're starting within this presentation, right? And I kicked it off certainly with it is, what have you heard, right? What have you heard about AI broadly, or AI and peer support, right? Think about the different ways you may already be using this in your day-to-day work or personal life, and just keep that in the back of your mind as we go through the presentation itself. So if you're not familiar, right? So I think if we said digital or virtual, right, most people would probably assume, same things. Yeah, I've got my phone, I've got Reddit. Maybe some of you are old enough to be, using things like ICQ or AIM. Use social media all the time, right? But we have a history, just like peer support broadly has a history. We can see a chronology of how this has evolved over time, right? And it has been true evolution of how it's been used within recovery support communities, be those informal mutual aid communities like in the rooms where they've digitized 12-step meetings, to online forums, right, to more recently modern AI applications of this work. And as we look through that, and it follows kind of the trajectory of the internet too, if you think of just technology timelines, it's both rapid and fast, but started with largely 2D or digital online forums and blogs. Those led to the first digital peer communities, things like SoberGrid, She Recovers, right? And then as computers became small enough to be in our pockets, we saw mobile revolutions of the same type of support. HS as an application, SoberGrid and its smartphone application as well, which was also a social media network. We've seen tech support lines and other forms of recovery applications. I think the first one I remember seeing was the recovery date or sobriety calculator, which I think is still around. And then, we lived in that space for a while, and adoption, if you look at Dr. Brandon Bergman's initial early work, right, was about 9% of people pre-COVID had actually used some of these tools. And so it wasn't necessarily no, but nothing, right? But there wasn't a wide scale adoption, and we still believe that follow-up studies haven't been done to be able to estimate it fully, right? But COVID-19 and that pandemic in many places where it may still be going on, increased adoption overnight almost, right? The rise of digital recovery meetings and other forms, providing one-on-one peer support and doing peer activities, team building, your supervisions. Like, we started doing so much digitally almost overnight, right? Adopting Slack, Teams, Zoom, ERRs if you use them. Like, all of this led to just massive adoption. We had to address things like tech literacy and all these barriers, right? But we have more people today using technology within peer recovery support than likely we ever would have if we hadn't lived through the COVID-19 pandemic. And then perhaps is maybe one of the silver linings of it, because more adoption does lead to broader scale and both adoption at an organizational level, so making it available to people, but also innovation. Where people are using something more, it's more likely to continue to progress and faster. Right. And then as we look at where we're at today, right, is we still see massive and more adoption of digital supports. We've seen virtual reality start to be adopted and used as it's different from digital. And then most recently, we start to see AI tools emerging, right, and both in workflows and also in the actual provision of recovery support services in limited ways. Right. And it's, overall, if we look at this, regardless of where you may land at, people need choice, in person and digital, virtual, AI, and all of these. But we've seen an idea that technology has been used to engage and enable more people to access peer support and recovery support in different ways. These are all good things, as long as they're maintaining service model, ethos, values, and are informed by people in lived experience. Whether we have a community that happens to be in a blog or a forum, or it's my community at my clubhouse, right? Community is community, and everybody deserves those choices to get it. So net positive, I would think, overall. But let's, most of this isn't about that, but I think that context matters, right? That we didn't just wind up here overnight. Technology is not new, even if it is underdeveloped in our field, right? And it's, as we talk about AI, again, similar to if we were to ask everybody about recovery, we get 46 or however many different people. I think there's 40 something on the call. We'd get 46 different definitions. We might get, something similar here. I think there's lots of different things, but as we talk about it today, AI is technology that can do things like write, translate, summarize. It can even chat with us, depending on your comfort level with, amorphizing essentially an algorithm, right? But we can do lots of things with it. And those are tasks that usually require some level of human intelligence, whether, at varying degrees, depending on the complexity of the task. But most of those things, I think we could say, require some variant of intelligence that we would conceptualize it as. And it works, specifically, right? It's not just magic, though it may feel like it depending on how much you've used it, but it works by recognizing patterns in just huge amounts of data, right? And using these patterns to predict what to say or do next. So it's not actually magic. And for the scientists on the call, right, it came from the machine learning background inside of the field, right? As we've grown and progressed, it's pattern recognition. It's predicting, right? It's just like we try to predict improvements in recovery capital and recovery science, and a lot of times these models in AI are really around recognizing patterns and then predicting it based on just amount of data that none of us can conceptualize, and it probably would hurt your brain to try. So it's that, and it's not just text, right? Our social media, our pictures, our videos, public and often private. There's lawsuits around it, right? But just all sorts of data. It's not just one type. It's not just spreadsheets, right? Think of the knowledge and data that we have generated as humans that have been digitized. All of that data is the subject of what's training most of these models in various different ways, right? So, you can just imagine what kind of data download like that to your brain would look like in terms of what you would know, but more importantly, to the way that they work as pattern recognizers. What types of patterns could you see emerging given enough data, right? And it's important that that's how they fundamentally work. They have so much data that they have, in large part until they make some mistakes, have seen the pattern and can predict it based on that volume, right? It's learning how language flows to make those predictions, right? So it doesn't really understand feelings or truth the way that you or I might do. Even though we may have some differences in that, we have a fundamental different understanding of emotions and what we conceptualize as fact or truth, right? That doesn't exist in this context. Even if it emulates those things, at the end of the day, it really just is really good at predicting what comes next, right? And that's, the first time, and we'll talk about this a lot today, that's why it's important, the human, your judgment is critical when using it, right? Because of how it operates, because it is not human, regardless of how much it may seem like it. Right, and you may have heard of tools over the last couple of years since they've started coming out, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, right? These are all AI models that can do all of those things we just talked about in similar ways, right? And RecoveryLink, which we'll talk about slowly, has built some AI tools and agents specifically for peer supporters, uses those models, right? These state-of-the-art models, what they're called, ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude, Llama from Facebook or Meta on the open source side. Those are the models that are being used by different interfaces. But at the end of the day, there's about 4 that are commonly used by most people that have the most enterprise protections, once we start talking about confidentiality, that are powering all the tools we're going to talk around, right? So the ones specific to our field are using those same ones. And it's best to think of these tools as digital teammates, right? That speak your language. They're not replacing you. They're not any of these things, but think of them as it's a great tool teammate, like a brainstormer partner, if you will, that's just always available when you are. Right. And whether we like it or not, AI is already being used across healthcare, across education, across public services, across every factor of our life. I guarantee you, whether you are directly interacting, you are interacting with AI several times every single day. And you have since you woke up this morning, probably within 5 minutes, right? And it is the world we live in, right? And whether that is a foregone conclusion forever, pending an apocalypse, one of the most important things is we live in this reality. Let's be pragmatic and inform it, mold it within our ethical constructs as peer workers and moderate and moral people, right? And that's that opportunity to lead the conversation about using AI ethically within the context of our field, in the context of recovery science, right? That's why we need trainings like this, even though this is just an introduction, right? So everybody, as you come back, one of the only takeaways in our condensed version, if you walk away with, is how are you having these conversations at your organization? Whether you're a peer organization or something else, you need to be talking about this. So you can stop listening and only take that because it is probably the most important thing. Don't ignore this, I beg of you, because it is coming. in various different ways, we need to make sure that it is coming in the way that we want it for our communities. Some of the bigger important ones, right? So myth versus fact. We do this a lot in drug policy and recovery support, right? And there's some big ones within AI, right? So we talk when we talk with peers at conferences or even in our own organization at Unity, right? So the first big myth that we often find is that AI will replace peer workers. The reality is that at least for organizations that we've seen adopting it, and because of the possibilities and what people want, which is still humans, it's meant to support and enhance human connection, right? And it has been since design as probabilistic or predictive models. It probably always will be to some degree. Now there is fields that I would, engineering, software development, certainly AI is going to replace some jobs. I don't see that happening in peer support work. I see it as augmenting peer workforces and organizations that give peers back more time so that they can really and truly get back to what technology was always supposed to do to a tool, which is more human-to-human contact and support. Second one, especially if you've used it and you can see how, like we said before, how magic it might feel, right? AIs are not always accurate, regardless of how much data they have, right? AIs can generate errors, which you may have heard called hallucinations in other settings, right? All the time. I will say that, if you look at the actual error rates, they're actually still slightly better than most humans. I know I make errors every single day, just for some context, right? And we got to be aware of those errors and how to reduce them, most importantly, right? But they do occur. They're not infallible, right? And I think the last big myth is that AI is inherently ethical, right? That because it's neutral, it doesn't have feelings, that it must bend the curve to always making the right decisions. But the reality is it's just like us as humans in a lot of regard because it's trained on our data. We have bias, we have unethical actions, right? So it's not there at baseline. AI requires human-guided principles and oversight to ensure ethical use. It cannot just work out of the box for what we're talking about. And AI is moving incredibly fast. If you watch this at all, right? It's just in most technology and computers or semiconductors. We're seeing massive upgrades and changes and innovation every quarter at this point, every 90 days or so, and it's only continuing to get faster, right? But as I mentioned before, y'all are using it every day, whether you know it or not, in various different ways for various different tasks. And in our field, as we bring this back to peers, right, we finally over the last couple of months have gotten some specialized tools specifically for peers, informed by peers, instilling some of our values. And it's if we talked about models, we're now talking about something called AI agents, right? The idea that something that is highly curated, using those baseline AI models we talked about to do something for you, right? And then getting back to that idea as a support tool, a helpful digital teammate, not to replace peers, right? So helping support and expand the role. And there's all sorts of things. These are not limited to the ones that are on the slide, right? But imagine things where you have to write a lot and you need to get a different tone, planning activities, planning group sessions, writing outreach emails, creating marketing material to some degrees, right? Or copy, certainly. There's all sorts of ways where it can support. And for peers, that Sky can also venture into direct service, right? In intentional ways. Still with the idea that it needs to be a teammate, right? And some of the creative ways we've seen it used at Unity over the last couple of months of our pilot, right, is we are seeing those very specific tangible things they're doing every day where they found use, right? Creating flyers, writing text messages that they may send to their peers, like Monday recovery support messages, practicing tough conversations. We never have enough training or enough time, but finding somebody where you can role play actively to have hard conversations, to practice motivational interviewing, to practice peer supervision skills. They make great use cases for that, right? And the most important thing here is these aren't theoretical. They're being used, again, today. Like these aren't like this would be cool if it exists. We have over 70 staff using it daily at Unity right now and finding different ways and new use cases every day. Like we built a new one yesterday. The peers could upload an audio snippet for like when they're conducting community outreach to get feedback on how they're verbally saying something, not just writing it, right? And that came directly from them and just what kind of tools they may want to get extra support. Right, and if we think across this idea of why would it be important of enhanced peer workflows, right, is because every time we find tools that can support that, we get back to that goal of more human connection, right? Saving time may be perhaps the biggest ROI because we get back less administrative burden, more time with humans, which is often a goal of most peer organizations and most peer staff, right? but the key across all of these, whether it's improving a workflow, administrative burden, actually supporting direct service, no matter what use case you find, is again, reiterating this point, is let it support that work, not replace that work where it's not applicable, especially in peer and recovery supports. If you think across all of this, right, in AI and deploying within peers, because there's lots of different ways to use AI. And if you're a daily user, you may recognize this already. What we have found with peers in some early testing, and as we've looked at it now, and some of the recommendations we can make is to help create and use AI agents that are specific to tasks, right? Because alternatively, you can use just a model and you have to know what to ask it, how to prompt it, how to get good results. We have found that within peer settings and with workforce, creating this process of identifying a task, how would AI be used to support it, right? Applying what you created in the real world setting, reflecting on those results, and then iterating is important, right? But it all begins with identifying the task to get granular on what the tool is going to do, rather than giving people broad use case or just chat like ChatGPT, because oftentimes that creates more of a barrier. So as you think of where it could be deployed in a peer organization, I would encourage you to think through that lens of, let's start with the thing that we want to improve first, and then let's build around that. And regardless of how we may deploy it, use it, it can only be helpful, at least in the peer context, if it aligns with our values, right? So it's peer specialists. We focus on autonomy, mutuality, empowering others at our root, at the core of the service model, right? And if AI is used right, it should support those principles, not undermine them, right? You should feel empowered after today, and if you already are, to shape how these tools are used in the field. To get back, they're not inherently ethical. We need to mold them, because they're molded after us, of what values are most important to us. Our tools should reflect that as well across the board. And if we are going to streamline through some of these just for the sake of time, right? But if some of this is new, if you're not sure how to use even AI, right, these ones are for you, especially my peers on the call, right? You don't need to know coding, fancy language, right? You don't have to have any of that knowledge. You're not a software engineer. You can talk to these AI tools just like you would a teammate, right? Being clear and specific and saying something like, help me plan a 1-hour peer-led activity on healthy boundaries, right? We wouldn't talk to it in text or format when we talk to a team member. Whether it's on Slack or in person, we want to get specific. You should treat these tools in the very similar way, right? The more detail you give, the better response that you're going to get out of these tools. Context and details matter perhaps more than anything else, right? And here's an example as you think through that is we may say, and we've seen this a lot, right? The first thing I may give it is like, hey, plan me a workshop. And that's all like somebody says, and you're like, cool. Like you're going to get something. It's going to be a workshop. Who knows what kind of workshop or what audience or anything else, right? So clarity in that details is perhaps, again, one of the most important things. So saying plan a 30-minute workshop for young adults in early recovery about coping with emotional triggers, much more detail, much better response that you're going to get after the fact. So wherever you may use this is always true with any AI you're going to use. Provide it more detail, more than you think you want to, and you will get some things that you have never thought possible, right? So if you find yourself often in your life right now doing the plan a workshop style of vagueness, try some of that more clear and context-driven one and see what the difference is like. It will change your experience overnight. One of the other important things to know is, because these are machines, they have limitations, right? This is context limits or memory limits is one of the most impactful based on the kind of efficiency and efficacy you may get in response. So imagining AI as a teammate, talked about your digital teammate, imagine he has a really small whiteboard. And the researchers, I know everybody, even program people probably know, right? But instead of the wall that's painted as a whiteboard, he has a very small, like 12 by 12, right? And they can only see what fits on that small board right now. So they have anything that came before that's been erased, no context of that in this idea of memory limits, right? They have a limited vantage point of what they can conceptualize, the knowledge they can access outside of their general. That's called a context limit, right? So we want to do things that support that. So one, we have to remember when we come back to conversations, it may have gone on too long. We've got to give it some additional context and details again, but it's also important to break tasks down into smaller steps. So in the same way you might project manage in Asana or other project management tools, you want to think about it like that. I know I want to get to here, this presentation, but maybe I'm going to break this down to tasks of starting with an outline, and then I'm going to refine that outline. Then I'm going to build the slide deck, and then I'm going to build the speaker's notes, right? I'm going to break that down into smaller tasks. And one of the best recommendations I ever got early on is if you find something in the way you're talking to it, it's called prompting. and it works well, save it and use it again, right? It's like being a wizard. It's your spell book. So any good prompts that you find, if you like the responses you've gotten, always save those to reuse them. Create yourself a prompt library. I'm going to skip forward some before I get the hook, because I want to talk about the ethics of it, right? And we'll actually spend a minute just here, right? So we've been piloting this across at Recovery Link and at Unity more recently, right? And beginning to see some non-empirically studied. We are working with partners now to begin to look at more formal empirical evaluation of AI use within peer settings. But if we look at early data administratively from us, about 6 to 10 hours, we average about 8 right now from early testing from using these tools across the peer workforce, including to a lesser degree about 4 hours at the supervisor level, right? But if you work in a practice-based setting, you know how much that reclaimed time can mean. It could be anywhere between 15 and 25%. The 24/7 access, especially if you have large-scale teams that work at different times, is critical. We have third shift peers, and making sure they continue to use these tools when somebody may not be available has been very helpful. Any staff experiencing burnout and fatigue because this work is hard and documentation is only an extra burden on that is where we saw most of the biggest impact in terms of satisfaction. Those that may struggle with different writing skills or just not like the administrative part of jobs, like writing auditable engagement notes, for example. Right. And these are just emerging ones. There's going to be both pitfalls and more benefits that we look at as we continue to study this over time. Right. And for my scientists on the call, this is the big ask for y'all is, in addition to just us, we need more people studying this just as we continue to evolve and services change. While we can mold it with peers, we need to make sure our science is backing it up and also done in the same value-driven way like recovery science is. We need empirical evaluation as these tools get adopted more and more before they get adopted, ideally, right? So a call to action for everybody that may have interest to get in that. And we're gonna have 2 more slides for my Echo team. Doing okay on time, Andrea?
Yes, you're okay. We have plenty of time.
I mean, y'all knew this was gonna happen when you asked me to present. There's like 9 slides that we can get to that are good too. So we'll make sure to send them out and you'll have access to them as well. And you can also email me after the fact and we can get copies of anything you need. But within any of these tools, right? And just like we have required ethics training constantly for peers at any type for their certifications, we have to look at it through this lens for all tools that we use. And AI is no different, right? And at a baseline, if we think of the ethics that are core to peer work, right? Respecting autonomy, person-driven choice, person-centered planning, promoting transparency, being honest and creating co-equal power dynamics with people, right? In that same sense, if you're going to use this, the minimum that we have to begin to look at is similar to how I started this training, right? Is if AI helps you use something, we can't hide it, right? And whether that's in its informed consents when the people are getting services because peers use it in the course of service delivery, or it's used, and like I said, in helping make this presentation, all of those have to be disclosed and talked about. And for those of us that are on the academic side that often have to meaningfully and always disclose conflicts of interest, it's the same type of framework. So I think even if we talk about it through peer context and values, it makes sense for all, right? Like these things are important. People need to know what they're both participating in, especially in things like AI, but all things. And we should disclose that. And it isn't a bad thing, right? That we'll get over this idea of stigma of, oh my God, they used AI to support the work. It's phenomenal, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing if we're transparent about it, right? If we maintain that trust that's so integral to peer support and people deserve to know, we have always got to share that. And you've got to come up with your own organizational policies and your personal edict of what that looks like, but disclosure and transparency is key, right? And it's, one of the things, especially as we look towards direct service augmentation by AI, accuracy verification, you may in other settings hear it called human in the loop, right? Because they can hallucinate, because just like humans, they can make errors, they can reflect bias that's inherent to humans because it's our data, right? It's in the training data. You always have to make sure that you're in that loop, right? Your judgment matters above all else. And we really shouldn't be relying on AI alone for critical decisions, whether it's referrals to make or how to write something or how to write a goal and a recovery plan. You cannot take the human out of this if we're going to maintain ethical use, right? Which helps us support also maintaining workforce issues in these conversations. If we're going to support and endorse AI use in our field, that's got to be the baseline. The human has got to be maintained in the loop. There always has to be a live peer support worker, or it shouldn't be adopted. At least that's our stance. And I would encourage, for each of y'all to think around where those ethical lines for you are, right? How are we making sure to align in the other work that you do every day with the tools that you adopt? Within this, as you look at the slide, you'll see a framework of how to kind of apply that to your decision making. There's also some discussion prompts that you may look at if you wanted to use this with your local teams and continue to explore these conversations, right? Ethical conundrums and dilemmas are complicated, but they're worthwhile to tease out and brainstorm before they happen. And I'll leave you with here. Implementation roadmap. If you're even considering this, if depending on where you're at in your journey as an organization or professional staff, or maybe you're taking this back to your organization to say, hey, we need to be talking about this, and how do we even start? Don't start by overnight saying, hey, we're now an AI informed and using organization or staff, right? And it's just expected everywhere. Start small, like you might go with or do with most good change management approaches, right? Find those 1 to 2 specific use cases, like documentation or resource finding, for example. What are we going to try this with? Select some secure tools, evaluate them based on your policies, which would also that you need a policy. Recovery Link AI, if your peer organizations, is a phenomenal use case because they're built specifically for you. There are others out there and encourage you to view them. There's some more on slides if you review them after this training that you can look at other recommendations we might have. And then pilot and refine that. See if it works. Select a small team. Don't roll it out with all peers at once. Document those results. Please be a data-informed organization and staff. It matters here most often than not, and make real-time adjustments based on that use. This is brand new, right? It's, imagine if, I don't know how old everybody is on the call, but imagine email came out today, right? People didn't adopt it overnight. And if they did, it probably did not go super well for a lot of different reasons. Same approach here. With any emerging technology, start small, go slow, and don't do it alone. It's kind of like harm reduction. But I'm glad somebody liked that. I'm going to wrap there. My email I'll put in the chat. Again, we have much longer presentations on this in training. I think as you think about AI and peer services, the best way I can think of it is there is a place for it here. We've already seen immense value early on. Got to create a really cool AI podcast the other day, which is phenomenal, right? But there is a lot of benefit here if you do it well. I wouldn't be afraid. I think there's some myths and understatements around energy use and water use and impact. But as I think I closely started with, this is coming. If you're not talking about it yet, you need to be, and you need to be soon, because this is going to come out faster than you can even imagine because it's already here. So happy to support any of that. We have an implementation toolkit and others. Happy to also meet with any scientists to look at our Pilot AI 3-phase study to give some ideas or just to brainstorm. Look for it at a future works in progress meeting as we talk about changes coming to the Echo shortly. But yeah, I think I hope some of it isn't impacted and you find various things to take away. It's an important topic. So thank you all for letting me present again. I think I was 3 minutes shorter than my first one, but still so far over. So I appreciate it. And I think, Andrea, if I'm also going to transition us into the next phase, unless there is a midpoint script that you have to do.
You may go ahead. I just wanted to say that I love the analogy with harm reduction. It's totally accurate. Love it.
I appreciate that.
And I was going to first open the floor so our learners can ask their questions before we move to the second part of the session. And I saw that Andrea Rocha gave us some tips when dealing with ChatGPT. Andrea, do you want to mute and tell us a little bit more? How do you do that?
Not much. I think it's the more specific you can be with your prompting, the more nuanced it can be with its output. And that's a valuable thing. But limit how much it asks you, because I've done this before and it wants me to like write a thesis to create a meeting brief. So yeah, you can tailor, you can tweak it. I think that's appreciating it as a very dynamic tool is a good tip.
Others, questions? Kristen.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. I was going to ask, did you use AI to create this PowerPoint? And if so, which one? And then earlier you mentioned spreadsheets. What AI platform would you recommend for that?
Yeah, happy to answer all of those. So from start to finish, for the presentation itself, the slides they were developed by Gamma AI. I'll drop a link in the chat. Most of the I would say design-based AI tools right now. Like most of them are just miserable. Like ChatGPT natively is just awful at it. It looks like I used to design, PowerPoint and MS Paint. But Gamma and another one called Beautiful AI are fairly good. I use Gamma and we started using it at Unity for a lot of our training development. As long as the content is good that's going into it, but it's saved countless hours for me. And my workflow for here, if you can imagine multi-step, is we have an enterprise grade ChatGPT license that I have custom GPTs to what Andrew was talking about that have custom instructions. One of those is a training development bot. So I work iteratively with that through its instructions about building out a new training. It asks clarifying questions. In this case, it was the use of AI within peer settings. It asks enough to get context so that it doesn't really just generate it by itself. It then spits that out in a format that Gamma likes, and then the slides get generated on our custom template within Gamma in about 30 seconds. So what used to take maybe 12 hours was done in about 1. Now again, that requires still deep expertise. I wouldn't recommend doing that for content that you don't necessarily know, but if your organization does 10 quick 10-minute bite-sized trainings that that's often a burden just to have to create some slides again, it's a huge benefit. There was other ones that we use on the spreadsheet point. So we use it and trial a lot of these at various different times. We have a process for trialing and trying to adopt new AI tools, at least at Unity. Currently, the ChatGPT enterprise license that we use across models. So we use a combination of the deep research models that can multi-sequential think and really build strong reports. Those are the ones that are great at reviewing spreadsheets or raw data sets. We also use its more creative models like 4.0 and others that more of a chatbot. We also use Gemini Enterprise, both pro and fast there. So they're deep research or deep thinking models, and the ones that are not necessarily reasoning. They all play different use cases. They all are slightly trained differently, have different weights. They respond differently. I would suggest if you're doing this at that level and not using specialized agents, at the get-go and you're going to use more general models, is to trial them out. I have found that if we're doing data analysis, whether it's from CSV, flat files, XML, BigQuery data sets and databases, Gemini Pro 2.5, which is now the standard model, is phenomenal and is much better than just about any other one. Software engineers use something called Claude, which is another popular model. I don't find it to necessarily be mostly beneficial for the social sciences, so I wouldn't recommend that one. But fact of the matter is, there is more tools than I could even imagine being adopted, releasing every day. The field, again, that rapidity of change, every recommendation I made today, perhaps besides Google's Gemini model and ChatGPT, may not even exist, or maybe woefully under-resourced and like just missing features in 6 months, or certainly a year or 2 years. So part of your processes is, as professionals, regardless of your role, and your organization should be constantly scanning the state of play, because this stuff is changing fast, faster than anything I've ever seen.
Thank you.
I have a
Thank
question.
you.
So I'm not sure how to phrase it. So we've been kind of playing around with AI, right? Like with just like ChatGPT or whatever's like browser we're using, just the regular standard one. So what you're saying, or what I'm hearing, is that you can actually implement it as part of your procedures and policy, or like implement it, yeah, across the board. And then could you use it then, or how would you use it? You probably could, to get on, say, whatever platform you're using, or software you're using. Like we use RDP, which is Salesforce based, um, to read the data and tell it what you want, and then just give it to you. Like, how would you get it into that system, I guess?
So, yeah, so we'll take each of those piece by piece and try to give it so at a policy level, right? And it's great that y'all are experimenting. Like integration at the organization across the board has to be well defined, and explicit policy, especially in the fields we work in. Considering HIPAA Part 2, just confidentiality, the types of data. So if again, everybody's first step should be, what is our organization or my work's AI policy, and making sure that's well rounded. We have a great example that we worked with our lawyers on. If anybody wants one, feel free to reach out to me. But to your later question, which is integration with other software, that's when it's going to be, and you have 2 choices, right? You can use it external, and then essentially, like, so say you're doing it to rewrite an engagement note, for example. and I'll come to the data in a second, you can use an external platform and essentially, again, copying, pasting that in if your organization allows it. But again, you'll need an enterprise grade, HIPAA compliant, Part 2 compliant AI chatbot for a tool like that. And that's certainly a valid use case, right? And the data works the same way. You could, from RDP and Salesforce, you could certainly download your raw data in CSV format, upload it into a HIPAA compliant enterprise grade AI like Gemini, and you would have to know how to talk to it to analyze that data. It's still the biggest human skill set in using AI is how do I prompt it, right? How do I talk to it so it understands me, which requires a level of expertise to do that well, at least in that framework, right? For RDP specifically, and this is going to be true for all software, right? It's true for Recovery Link, full integration and RDP being built on Salesforce could help them if they want to adopt it. Salesforce has a huge, it's called Agentforce. They have a huge adoption of AI across Slack and also their core Salesforce platform. They own Slack, and RDP is built on that. But they will have to make that choice either through request or payment to enable that and doing it in a compliant way. But it's always going to be incumbent on integration into the sense of, can I use it within the technology I already use? That software company, whoever develops it, is going to have to release it. What I would tell you at this point is if they haven't already, they are thinking about it. And this is anybody, RDP or otherwise, similar to us at Recovery Link. Over the next 24 to 36 months, every piece of software you use is going to have some version of AI, right? If it's not there already. So, but if you want that to come faster, if that's a value to you, like emailing RDP, the more they hear from people saying, hey, we want this type of tool, it's important. But I think that the last piece of advice I give you, because that piece around prompting is so important, right, is depending on your level of adoption, the internal champions at your organization, right? Maybe you're one, maybe it's somebody else, but you need to establish that subject matter expertise. Somebody on staff needs to understand this, or you need to bring in outside parties, right? There's lots of SMEs and trainers on this, but if you try to adopt this as an organization without a whole lot of training, a whole lot of skill building, it will fall flat, right? Because it feels flat if you don't know how to use it. And, again, frankly, just watching a YouTube video from some influencer somewhere is not a great way to train on how to use AI, right? So there's ways around it, but that would be my biggest recommendation, is that intentional part of how are we rolling this out? So I'm also happy to follow up on any of those after this. But I know Patrick has his hand raised too.
That's cool. That's what I've been doing, watching YouTube. So thank you.
If we have time, I know we're going to be bumping up against time. I appreciate the presentation and your work on this, Rob. My concern is like as humans, we tend to kind of go with the path of least resistance. With us, I know that we believe in the work and we know the value of human connection. So I don't necessarily see too much of an issue there. I worry about like funders and policymakers and folks that could see something that's much cheaper, like an AI tool or chatbots and stuff like that, and think, well, this is much cheaper than actually paying a healthy peer workforce. Why would we do this much more expensive thing over here when we can just plug in some technology? And so I think it's not necessarily like a question, but I think that like as people in the field and as we have time and as we gain our networks and influence, to kind of push in that direction as well, to emphasize the value. And you did. I'm not saying that you didn't, but I mean, not just amongst ourselves, but as we use this tool, there's always that asterisk of like, listen, this is something to augment the really important work, which is that human connection, so that when we communicate with funders and policymakers and people who make decisions based off of very limited data, because they're not us, that hopefully they're making the right decisions.
And they're super important points, right? I think we can never say that enough, and should scream it from the rooftops. And it's one of the most important roles, not that just peers play, but again, a scientist, I think, that we have is absent data, the compelling zeitgeist and narrative will prevail. And as we know of modern politics, right, that can drive everything outside of maybe some deeper thought, but absent anything, it can certainly prevail. So like us establishing baseline empiricism around this topic, like, because we have to, like, who is it beneficial for, under what conditions? Like, because is there a subpopulation of low acuity that does just need a chatbot that is well trained and can be ethical? And that would maybe, right? But where is it that in vivo or human augmented services, the outcomes don't differ, or they're the same, right? What are the cost like we need analysis across all of that written in such a way that the evidence can support those claims. Because I think, today that the statement from an ethics perspective of human augmentation is the right one. It is the one that's value aligned. But in terms of like the empirical question of, is it necessary? I don't know. Ethically, I think so, but from an outcomes perspective, I have no idea, right? I think we still know even very little on digital and virtual services in terms of, for which milieus are those perfectly fine for, perhaps even better outcomes or worse, right? We have so much that we still need to know, which is, I think it's our refrain in recovery science is a, kind of a nascent field, but like, I think that's the call to action for those that may be interested in technology is people will write our narrative for us if we don't either speak out or have, the actual empirical study done. And I think we also have to continue to evaluate our own thinking, not divorced from ethics, but combined with it of like, what are the outcomes? When could that be appropriate? Because there may be conditions in which human augmentation is not necessary. I don't know those answers because it's, again, still new.
Thank you. And we're going to take one last question before we move to the second part of the session. Phil.
Yeah, I'm just curious if any, you may have already answered this, but I wonder if anybody has implemented AI for warm lines or resource navigation aspects.
So I think we'll see the next level of adoption, which is those warm lines not being replaced, but actually using things like 11 Labs and other voice to text or TTS, because those have gotten fairly good. We've actually been exploring with this option because where funding cuts happened, I think back to Patrick's point, sometimes how can we maintain services in the light of cuts, right? Some of our benefit of using AI has certainly in the context of losing millions at Unity a few months ago has been, something's like, oh shit, this could help. And I think warm lines may be a similar vantage point, but I think you'll see more adoption there because we're seeing it on large, corporations that are using it for their customer support lines. I think that'll be one of the next big waves in our field. I haven't seen that in that sense. What we have seen is website-based and application-based chatbots that do that, right? So if you go to Unity Recovery's website, for example, bottom right, you'll see what we call Penny AI. We used to have peers that staff that to navigate. Here's the digital recovery meeting link. Here's a resource if you need a quick thing for recovery housing, or if you want to know more about these services. We've taken peers off that. We had to lay off a lot of peers, and that was one of the first use cases we had for this. So Penny AI now serves that role of both helping find resources, Unity or otherwise, and serving a quasi warm line facility again. And there's big alerts on there like, hey, this is not crisis, like it's like so. But I think from a peer warm line perspective, that's the iterations I've seen in terms of chatbots facilitating some of the core function, similar to texting. And the next iteration, I think
that makes sense to me because the overhead or having the funding to be able to do 24/7 or even weekend coverage for us is a challenge. So yeah, no, that makes sense.
And I think I'll make, if I may, sorry, Echo team, but like, because that combined with Patrick's point is some of the use cases, like where is it possible that it's appropriate? If we can only staff live peers 8 to 5 on a warm line and the alternative is nothing, is it better to have ethical and well-implemented AI that can serve a baseline function when the alternative is 0? And personally, I think that is where the ethical gray area is. Like, I think that's appropriate, right? Because the alternative is nothing. So, but these are the type of questions we're going to have to contend with, right? Nuance will matter in these conversations because it quickly goes from that to some legislator saying, well, you don't need any money because the AI could do it 24/7, right? That's the slippery slope.
Thank you, Dr. Ashford. And now in the interest of time, I'm going to let you now inform our participants about our transitions and our new beginnings in recovery science.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And I'm going to ask my colleagues here in a moment to describe some of these further changes. But for those of you that have been part of this ECHO or engaged in the Peer Recovery Innovation Network over the last 2 or so years, part of the original vision was to create what we consider a collaboratory, right? And there's some great, and seminal research articles on what a collaboratory is, but basically it's a living lab, right? Where people are community-based lab, where people can engage in these topics like AI, or if you've been to other echoes around different pilot studies, different topics, measurement, et cetera, there's all sorts of ones. But we also want to make sure that there's broader implications and broader ways to engage in that collaboratory, not just within an echo or not just this format. And I think we've gotten a lot of great benefit out of this echo for the last 2.5 years. Lots of different sessions. I want to take a moment just to really thank the hub. I know Cheryl and Patrick that are on the call today, Andrea, Adrian, like our entire Print team that supported both this echo and of recovery science. Phenomenal work, and I think we've gotten a lot of benefit out of that. And it's not, while the echo may be sunsetting as we transition to new ways to engage in the collaboratory, new ways to engage in science, multimodal, if you will, going into year 3. That's our goal, right? We still want to learn science. We still want to engage with our colleagues. So it's not that echo is going away, though it is. It's that we're making room for unique and modern opportunities to engage how you might see fit, right? Based on your schedule. Hey, I have 15 minutes this month versus the full hour. Great. We're going to find some way for you to engage. And that's really what our next wave and iteration or evolution of the Peer Recovery Innovation Network specific to the collaboratory is. Some of those ways at the start of this reimagining that are going to look like, we will be establishing what is probably the closest direct replacement of the echo. There's 2 things, the webinars, which I believe Adrian will talk about in a moment, but works in progress, which is that the study part of it. Hey, I really need to come talk to some peers, peer organizations, recovery scientists, and others to brainstorm this idea I have and get some feedback. I'm working on this. Maybe I'm writing and not necessarily at the pilot stage or planning stage of an empirical or scientific study. But that works in progress meeting will be an opportunity for those that are scientifically minded to keep back and keep deriving that benefit of talking about their science and learning about other science, similar to what's been happening at the ECHO for the last couple of years. And it's going to be phenomenal and targeted, right? So you'll be able to come and really benefit from that in a smaller format and an intentional format. The other one that I'm going to describe, and I'll give credit to the Recovery Research Institute, which is, from their addiction research summaries have been longstanding and are phenomenal. I love reading them. We have started doing the same thing, and we'll continue these summaries, both from an academic lens and how to understand what these studies would represent, but also creating key messages in more of a gray literature writing style, so really approachable, because we want to be very mindful that we're both talking to scientists, emerging and established, as well as peers in different parts of the workforce. So you'll find summaries of key articles and research and important topics that are coming out about recovery science, coming through into your inbox as part of the collaboratory too, and opportunities to discuss those across the way, but those will be coming out monthly as well. And we've got some other elements of the collaboratory, which I'm going to ask next Dr. Lindsay, my colleague, to describe as well.
Absolutely. Thanks, Robert. And as Robert said, we may be sort of phasing out the echo, but we're really just creating new opportunities and additional opportunities for everyone to engage with each other. So one of those, some of you may recall in the early phases of PRIN, and many of you probably participated, we set out to develop a research agenda for peer recovery support services. Many of you probably participated in some of the activities like the survey. We heard from 130 plus people across the country and narrowed that down to 10 priority areas. So what we'd like to do is establish a webinar series where we break down each of those 10 priority areas. We presented on that here in the past, so some of you may recall areas like peer well-being, key metrics for evaluation of peer services, peer services and harm reduction and how those intersect. So within those webinars, we'll talk about the relevance of that topic, some of the existing literature, potential research questions, potential study designs, but that will sort of replace the didactic portion of what we often do here. But that way we'll really tease out each area of that research agenda and sort of continue to move that into the field. So I'll turn it over to Andrea to say a bit about a podcast opportunity that will be sort of another didactic element to participate in.
Yeah, absolutely. So also launching this fall, we will be putting together a recovery science podcast. Just again, part of this portfolio of work to grow the field of recovery science and share that great work out. It's in early development stages, but what we're envisioning right now is short, meaningful conversations with researchers, practitioners, leaders, peers in the recovery space, many from this community, and just exploring what's new in recovery science, and from the perspective of peer support, workforce development, innovations in service delivery and practice. It's designed to be very palatable, very quick, very practical, very grounded in real world impact, kind of perfect for busy schedules, we hope. So first episodes are going to be dropping this fall. We'd love your support in spreading the word, but more importantly than that, and sort of getting your ideas for future guests, future topics. So throw ideas in the chat. I will also repost my email. We'd love to get your thoughts on how to do this and do it well.
Thank you, Andrea. And Kirsten, I think you wanted to add something. Kirsten Gallegos, our program coordinator.
Dr. Ashford covered the summaries pretty well, but that's just going to be a really great way for us to get the information out from behind a wall and make sure that it's reaching people who can really do meaningful work with those outcomes.
Okay, thank you.
And Andrea, I might just clarify one thing. I know Dr. Ashford, Robert, mentioned the works in progress group, and many of you have given us feedback about this format. And what we found oftentimes is the didactic just isn't quite enough time to explore the topic like we saw with AI today. And the works in progress portion similarly sometimes isn't enough time for the researcher to really dive into the feedback and go into depth in their project. So that works in progress group will allow additional time for that. And the webinar series will allow additional time for the didactic portion. So just know we have heard you all, and that's part of the rationale for some of those changes. So back to Andrea. I know we are at time.
Well, thank you to all of you, and I want to very specially thank Dr. Ashford for a fascinating topic that he shared with us today. Please remember that the content of this session is going to be available at our Be Well Texas YouTube page, and also the didactic material will be sent to all of you along with a post-session survey. We thank you once again for being with us throughout this wonderful Recovery Science series, and we'll see you soon. You'll hear more from us. Have a great rest of your day, you all. Thanks.